How's it going, everyone? King Blacktooth here. Welcome to this video. I feel honoured that you've joined me for my first deck highlight for Gwent, the Witcher card game's closed beta. So getting straight into it without any fussing around, on screen right now you've got a quick reference guide. If you just want to pause the video and make the deck yourself and not have to listen to me, this is a great way to use it. So on the left you've got all the cards that I've included and some extra statistics on the right. So how many cards in total, how that's split up, what kind of deck archetype this is, card advantage and draw potential, which are very important factors I use to compare decks, which I will be going over very shortly, and a general idea on how you could play this over the 3 rounds, although you've got to take it in your own direction and really make the deck your own if you plan to do that. And speaking of which, obviously there are some cards here which you may want to switch out, and that's totally fine. The whole thing about Gwent is that some of these decks are variable. You may want to remove an Archgriffin, for example, and put in an extra Griffin because you've got enough clear weather things. You might want to remove the Frightener if you don't feel like you're going to get enough value. You may want to remove the prize winning cow if you don't really feel like it's much of an issue, and etc. So feel free to make your own twists on this particular deck. So let me just start with just telling you a little bit of why I built this deck and what the purpose of the deck really is. So it's a monsters deck. I called it Baby Boomers. I actually made this deck, and I made it because the archetype was clearly there for us to make it with. So there was a lot of cards which really benefit a swarm deck archetype. So I'm trying to utilize that. So I thought I'd build a deck, try and build the best deck I could, which would really use this swarm deck archetype to the maximum effectiveness. Now, whether that means it's a good deck is completely different. Just because I can make it doesn't mean it is a great deck. So I'll go through talking about the deck size and some of the card advantage and draw potential terminology. Then I'll go through why I picked certain cards and some of the combos you could achieve. And then finally I'll go over the strengths and weaknesses and sum it all up on telling you how I feel about this particular deck. So the general idea of this deck is that you place loads of really weak minions down, like your Neckers and your Arachas, the lesser fire elementals from the fire elemental, and then so you've got a board of really weak minions. You start duplicating all these things with the monster nest, then you get absolutely tons on the board, and then you can start buffing them up with things like Gales, the leader card, which will set all their strength to 6. You've got Zoltan Animal Tamer to buff a row. You've got Thunderbolt Potion. Its value alone could be immense when you have a, say, like 12 Arachas on a board. That would be an immense value there. You've got a couple of tech cards which really are defensive. The whole deck is really defensive. So you've got your Griffins, for example, stealing cards, Archgriffin to clear any weathers because that's not a good thing for you. As a final combo on the last couple of rounds, you've got things like the Frightener to consume your special cards you've used. You've got the Grave Hag to consume all of these swarmed minions that you had, which is really effective. And you've got like the Caretaker to add abilities to your roster that you couldn't normally get access to. Things like Medic, you could steal a Medic, you could steal a Resilient, things like that. So let's go over some statistics before I go over what cards I've chosen and what their role is in the deck. So the deck size here is 26 cards, which for some of you will make you really happy for weird reasons that I won't go into. So it's basically 1 card off the minimum, and I think the Swarm archetype is probably one of the decks, if not the only deck, which warrants a larger deck size, because if you've got loads and loads of musters, you don't want duplicates. Now I've only got 2, which are the Neckers and the Arachas, so I feel my odds are pretty good and I could get down to a minimum deck size quite easily. But there may be a couple of cards you want to switch out. I might be inclined to put in more Necker Warriors, because I think the Monster Nest will muster out things from the deck. So card advantage and draw potential are 2 terms which I'm going to use in all of my deck highlights, and they allow me to compare decks generally to see how they'd fare and see how they'd play against each other without actually worrying about what specific cards are in the deck and what strength they are, etc. Just give me an idea of where they'll be when they face each other. So these numbers are reliant on an optimal hand. If you don't draw the right card that gives you card advantage or draw potential, then these numbers are going to go down. So these are optimal, maximum draw potential and card advantage, okay? And rely on an optimal circumstance. So card advantage is how many more cards am I going to have in my hand compared to the opponent. So this particular deck will have 2 card advantage. I'll have 2 more cards than the opponent. And the way this works is when I do another deck highlight, say Skellige, if they had 4 card advantage and I compared it to this one with 2, then the Skellige deck would win by 2 card advantage, because they have 4, I have 2, and the difference is 2 to Squirtel's favour. So that's a way of seeing, in most optimal circumstances, how much card advantage your deck has, which is really good. If you've got a card which you really need to play when the opponent has passed, you might need to stick in some more card advantage. Draw potential is how many more cards can you get out of your deck after the initial opening hand and such. So at the beginning of the game, everyone gets 10 cards, then you get another 2 at the end of round 1, and you get another 1 card at the end of round 2. So everyone gets access to 13 cards. But this draw potential means I can get another 8 out of my deck in an optimal circumstance. In this particular deck, I get 2 from Avalak, he will draw me 2. I get 2 from the Last Wish, which will draw me 2. The Necker and the Arakas will each draw 2 extra musters as well. So that's 8 potential. So I get 26 cards in my deck, I get 13 to begin with, and I can draw another 8 if I get the right cards, which means I can draw 21 cards out of my 26 card deck, which means there's only 5 cards left in my deck in an optimal circumstance that I can never actually touch. Now there are exceptions, things like the Caretaker could manage to medic something out of the opponent's graveyard, which should give me some extra stats here and there, but for the most part it's going to be 8 draw potential. Okay, and I actually think this is quite important information. The better you can draw from your deck means the more cards you've got access to, and you can really look through your entire deck for a good strategy depending on what opponent you're fighting. And having 5 cards in your deck that you can never access, I think is pretty good statistics, isn't it? I mean, drawing 21 out of 26 is a lot, you know, so that's reasonably good, I think. And I think that is a good statistic to have. Alright guys, so let's go through each particular card and say why I put it in there. Maybe you might want to change this, you might want to change that. I'll give you the pros and cons of a particular card and what sort of roles they play in this particular deck. So first we've got the Neckers and the Arakas. These are obviously going to be your main swarm units. You're going to use these early on and use Monster Nest to duplicate them and buff them. You get loads of them, and so your buffs affect a lot of them. Okay, so they're pretty much staple in this particular deck. So the Necker Warrior is an interesting one. I really like him. You may want to put more of these in once we get a little bit more of a confirmation on how Monster Nest actually works. So for the most part, I put him in as a safety strat. If you get a duplicate muster in your hand, that's usually quite bad, but this can make it actually quite good because you've got 2 Neckers in your hand, which I don't think is going to happen in this particular deck, but if it does, then you place one down and the other one comes from your deck and you get to keep one in your hand. So the Necker Warrior will copy the Neckers on the board and put more of them into your deck, and then you can use that duplicate Necker that you had to pull them out on a later round or a later turn. So it turns a bad muster duplicate into a good muster duplicate, so it's a nice safety strat. And you may want to put more of these in when we get the confirmation that Monster Nest, when it duplicates a Necker, will actually duplicate the ability to muster. So will it activate the muster when it duplicates it? Once we get confirmation of that, if it does exist, then the Necker Warrior is going to be a lot more powerful. It's going to allow you to Necker Warrior loads of things, Monster Nest them, and then suddenly tons and tons and tons more come out of your deck for free, really. If Monster Nest duplicate the muster ability, it kind of allows you to freely muster all of these cards out, which is really good. So the prize winning cow is basically just here to protect against Epidemic. Now the lowest strength is 1 here, but that's going to go up in strength and not going to be played till round 3. The next is the Frightener, again not going to be played till round 3. So your Arakas are really vulnerable to Epidemic, and then your Neckers are vulnerable after that. You don't have any medics in this particular deck because there are no monster medics that I could see, and so it's very important to protect them, and that's what the prize winning cow actually does. If the opponent has, I think her name was Pavetta, where she does 2 epidemics in a row, that's just going to get rid of all of your Arakas because they're all going to be the same strength, and then it's going to get rid of all of your Neckers. So it's really dangerous to not protect against Epidemic in this deck. The Frightener is going to be a round 3 combo. It's going to consume all the special cards you've used, which are things like Monster Nest, some Thunderbolt potions and stuff like that. So it's going to be, a round 3 combo. And to go along with that, the Grave Hag is going to do the same. It's going to be a massive burst of strength in the final round. Hopefully you've got card advantage enough to make it so the opponent couldn't do anything about, because it is going to be quite a vulnerable card once you've played it. They're definitely going to want to get it down. It's going to be an easy target. A Fog or a Scorch, or, there's a couple of things it could do. goes up in potential depending on how good your monster nest duplicating combo is in the first couple of rounds. The more you can get into the graveyard, the better this card's going to get. We've got the Fire Elemental. Now the reason I stuck him in is because at the start of your turn, create and play a lesser Fire Elemental unit. So it's going to create lesser Fire Elementals every one of your turns. So you're going to get a reasonable amount out, and the lesser Fire Elementals also get duplicated by the monster nest. So this is just extra swarm potential. You could play it on a later round where you're maybe stalling and it's still, you know, churning them out, which is really nice. So I think it's a decent card to stay in. We've got Zoltan Animal Tamer. Really, he's got nice strength and he's really here to buff an entire row with +2, which gets immense value if you happen to have 12 Arachas on a particular row. So you can get such good value from Zoltan, and he's your only form of wounding. If you really want to, you can -2 if a really good opportunity arises. You can -2 from everything on an opponent's row. Now originally I had Lesh in here because he created rabid wolves, 3 of them, which would also get duplicated by the monster nest. However, he also creates a fog, and that's going to just basically hinder this particular deck, so he's not really good to fit in here. Same for Caranthir, which he creates a frost. Now you could split up the Neckers and the Arachas into 2 particular rounds and try and just win via 1, but that's totally up to you. In which case Caranthir and Leshen would kind of work, so you could alternate the particular rounds, but that's just something to keep in mind. I didn't choose to do that. We've got the Griffin. I really like this card. 6 strength is nice. Choose a non-gold unit from your opponent's graveyard and move it to yours. So there's 2 reasons to do this. The first one is you'll buff the Grave Hag by 1 more strength, which is not too much, but decent. Second reason is just to steal something useful from your opponent. A medic, which you're not really going to be able to use, I don't foresee, or, you know, you could steal something really, really important to them. Skellige springs to mind, you know, stealing one of those axemen that can get buffed in strength. Something that they would really want to pull out, you can steal it before they can. So really, really, really decent in that respect. We've got 3 Arch Griffins. Now, a little bit of testing to see whether this is worth it. They're not going to be 8 strength. Remove weather effects from the row on your side of the battlefield. So it only affects yours, which is really, really nice. This deck is very defensive, and these are pretty much the only way of dealing with weathers. That's why there is 3 of them in there. But they're not going to be 8 strength, so it doesn't seem as powerful as it used to. So depending on how easy they are to use and how many weathers the opponent has and stuff, we do have a decoy to hopefully decoy these back up. But you may consider dropping one, maybe putting another Griffin or another Necker Warrior in or something like that, if you want to. See how it plays out. We've got the Caretaker, a really nice card, 6 strength. Choose a non-gold unit from your opponent's graveyard and play it. Now this card really just opens up the floodgates in terms of what abilities you can get hold of as monsters. Now, I couldn't find any medics, so it doesn't seem like you've got any. So this guy is going to give you potentially the availability of medics. You get the potential of stealing a medic and using it, which in this particular deck there's not too much. You may want to consider medicing out the prize winning cow, possibly. You might consider medicing out an Archgriffin. So medic is not going to be as useful, but you could medic out, for example, the Alvin Mercenary to play a random special card. If it's a decoy, drop it down, pick it back up, you know, stall. So it gives you a lot of potential. Special cards are really useful in this deck as well. So the Caretaker is going to be just really, really good. Finally, I chose Yennefer instead of Leshen. This is the card. And the reason for this is 9 strength is pretty damn good. Choose to create and play either a Unicorn unit or a Chironex unit. So what the Unicorn does is it adds +2 strength to everything on the entire board. Okay, so including gold units. So +2 to everything. The Chironex -2 from everything. Now minusing 2 from everything is super dangerous, considering your Arachas and your Neckers are all, like, you know, really low. But +2, you are giving it to the opponent. However, you'll get so much more value from this than they will. Okay, because you're going to have about 12 Arachas, you're going to have about 12 Neckers, something like that. You're going to get so much more potential strength from buffing everything on the board than they are. So I think overall it's definitely worth taking it in this particular archetype. We've got Thunderbolt Potions. These are generally here to buff an entire row of Arrakis or an entire row of Nekkers, because it'll do all copies for strength, which is really, really good. The Monster Nest, obviously a very staple card. Get as many of these as you can. You know, the Caretaker might help with that with Elven Mercenaries, etc. So obviously we need to know whether it duplicates any muster capabilities, which is really nice. And I think it's been confirmed, although they are testing and experimenting with this, is that when the Monster Nest duplicates, say, a Nekker or an Arrakis or whatever, it doesn't duplicate any buffs it got. So I can't use Thunderbolt Potion on 3 Nekkers and then Monster Nest them, expect them all to go up to, you know, they're all 7. It wouldn't work like that. You'll buff the 3 Nekkers up to 7, and then the duplicate ones will still be at 3 at the moment. But they are toying with the idea, and I personally think it's probably better if it did do that. But it might be too strong, I don't know. So Monster Neck is very staple, but it doesn't allow that sort of capability. We've got Decoy for a little bit of card advantage, which will help with the Grave Hag. There's not too much here that you would want to decoy. You know, you could decoy up a Nekker and then place him back down to get extra musters from the Nekker Warrior. Seems like a bit of a waste. You could maybe decoy him up so you can play him on a later round and still get all the lesser fire elementals another turn. Decoying her or the Frightener would not work in the slightest, because they would lose their buff and then you have nothing else to consume. So really you're just kind of doing it for the Archgryphin's clear weather capability, or the Griffin to steal something else from the opponent's graveyard. So there's not real much use for that, but it's really just there for safety reasons, get you a bit of card advantage as well. The Last Wish I think is quite important here. We need to be able to draw cards from our deck to make sure we get a lot of the nice cards that we have here. Like I said, this deck has 8 draw potential, so it's reasonable. Only 5 cards will stay in the particular deck, and this is an important one to draw for that purpose. And finally we've got Avalak. You know, he's a very good spy. He'll give you 2 cards and give the opponent 1. So this is also good for running through your deck and getting some extra really impressive cards. Play him after you've played your musters, of course. But if you've got the card advantage, he could be a card that you play at the very end of the game, you know. So the opponent has passed, you play him, you'll get 2 cards and they'll get 1 that they can never use, which is a really powerful strategy. But I don't think this particular deck will be able to get into that situation, because we've only got 2 card advantage. And I think other decks will have either the same or a little bit more. So I don't think that's really an option for this deck, just because we don't have enough card advantage. And obviously we have the leader card Gales, which is going to set a particular row strength all to 6. So really good for all of your Arrakis if you've got loads and loads. Bit worse, but still okay for all your Nekkers. You know, the prize winning cow could go to 6 strength as well, which is really nice. Depending on how weak the Archgriffins get, they might benefit from it as well. So, you know, he's going to be a very staple leader card for this particular deck. So some of the strengths and weaknesses of this particular deck is, obviously you've got the potential to create tons and tons and tons of units on several different rows and create really high strength really quickly. I say quickly, it's still going to take, like, you know, several turns, but you jump from having, you know, about 20 strength to having something like over 100 strength really quickly. Weathers are not very effective against you if they're played very early. If they weather your Arrakis, it's not a big deal, because they go from 2 strength to 1. Now, if they weather after you've done your buffing, then that's a big deal. That is a problem, because they will lose all their buffs, and you basically lost those buffing cards, and you haven't got too many. You know, you've got a few ways. You do have a very powerful end game combo, I would say. You know, your Grave Hag is going to be a really powerful one just on her own, but you've got to make sure that she's kind of safe in some way if possible. And you can draw a reasonable amount of cards from your deck. Like I said, only 5 stay in there that you can never get out in any particular game if you get an optimal hand. Now, I think this particular deck has more weaknesses than strengths, and I made this particular deck because I could, but let's go through the weaknesses. So it's extremely weak to Lacerate and Stemmelfall's Tremor and Manticore's Venom and anything else which does a -2 strength on a particular lane, like Zoltan or Yennefer, for example. Okay, So Lacerate now does 3 damage, inner lane wounding. So all of your Arachas dead, all of your Neckers dead. If you run into an opponent with Lacerate, they're just going to obliterate your particular rows if you don't manage to buff them quick enough, okay? But the problem is your playstyle is in such a way that you want to monster nest them, because you can't buff them and then monster nest because it doesn't carry over, which I think would help this deck a lot if it did, and they are still experimenting with that. But you play in such a way that you want to get loads onto the board before you start buffing them, and that really just keeps them so vulnerable to Lacerate, which could do 3 damage to entire row, so it would still kill the Neckers. You've got Stelfor's Tremors, which does 2 strength to everything on the board, on your side of the board, the opponent's. So, you know, all your Arachas are dead if you haven't buffed them. Your Neckers are really close to being dead. So, you know, it's crazy. And Manticore's Venom, -4 wounding to everything of the same name on a particular row. So all your Arachas, all your Neckers could die if they choose to point the finger at that. You know, so it's just, this deck is so weak to that particular thing, and I don't feel like there's any way to protect against that apart from buffing early. If you buff early, then you're probably going to lose the strength battle, which is what you're going for. You've got an over-reliance on the Neckers, Arachas, and Monster Nest combo. If the opponent kill your Neckers and your Arachas early, you've got no way of medicing them out. You can't copy them anymore with the Necker Warriors, so, you know, your whole thing just falls apart. You've still got the Fire Elemental. It'll spawn a couple. It's not big enough, really. You've got, you know, a couple of things, but it's not really going to make much of a dent if you've lost your primary cards there. This deck has no offensive capabilities, okay? Apart from the potential of Zoltan and Yennefer being able to -2 for things, it's not really that much, and it'll hurt you probably a lot more to use Yennefer in that particular way, as it does the entire board. You know, you can steal stuff from the opponent's graveyard, but it's not massive. You're not really going to be able to deal with any of the strength combos your opponent tries to do. So if they have loads of Commander's Horns and a really good combo, you can't really deal with it. You just have to hope that you've got more strength and they are not damaging you in some way. And this deck might be a bit predictable. As soon as you see Gales and you start seeing Arachas and Neckers, you pretty much know what they're going to do. You know, it's probably going to be an easy counter, in my opinion, if the opponent has any offensive capabilities. And again, Weathers can just take down strength of, say, Grave Hag, any buffed Neckers or Arachas, just take them down, and it's like, oh, all that work I did is suddenly gone. So it's a dangerous deck to play. I'm not sure about this one. So tips to beat this deck. Hopefully you might have an idea on how to beat this deck. Having Lacerate or Stammelfor's Tremors or Manticore's Venom in your deck means this deck just falls apart completely. So I think that particular weakness is so strong, this deck won't get too far, in my opinion. We'll have to see how it goes and see just how many people take those types of cards. But I think Lacerate and Stammelfor's Tremors are good enough that they'll see common play. If you remove the Neckers and the Arachas quickly, the deck relies on them a lot, so they won't really have anything else to do, you know. They haven't got massive combos there. You're not going to be able to get the Grave Hag up very high because there's not many things in the graveyard, so it kind of stops the whole thing if you can manage to get rid of the Neckers. And there's no real way for this particular deck player to play around that, because they'll muster them all out. It seems like having a duplicate hand would be better, because then you can play one out and it gets lacerated or whatever, then you've still got one left in your hand that you can play out later. But yeah, get rid of them quickly and they won't have anything to do. The final tip is to be ready for the Grave Hag combo on the final round, or the Frightener combo, or whatever. Okay, so you know it's coming because it's such an obvious choice for this particular deck. It kind of plays into their predictability. So in your deck, if you can get more than 2 card advantage, then you might be able to be the person who can play the final card. Okay, if you got less than that, then you might suffer from the Grave Hag being the final card they play and not being able to do anything about the massive strength. But maybe save a Scorch, save a Weather, save a Dimeritium Bomb, because it will just set the strength of the Frightener and the Grave Hag back down to 1 and 2, which is pitiful, you know. So they can be taken care of, but you've got to be ready. And I think because this deck is predictable, you'll see that coming. So thanks for watching this particular deck. I mean, let me know what you think. I built the deck because I could, like I mentioned, and I think it's going to be a fun deck. I'd really love to get a good go with it, you know, and have an opportunity to try out all the biggest combos and see just how far you can take it. But I really feel like the weaknesses are so vast that it's because most of your stuff is really generally quite weak, and you can't particularly buff it up early on, because if you do, then you're not really going to have the strength to compete, in my opinion, because you've wasted your buffs. That it's just so weak. Your units are so weak, so it's so vulnerable to just bits and bobs of wounding. You know, if the person has a savage bear on the board, you place your Arrakis down, and it's nearly half dead. You know, if they have 2 savage bears on the board, you can no longer play an Arrakis at all. Yeah, so I really like the deck. I'd want to give it a go, and I probably will, but I'm feeling like it's going to be an uphill struggle. Anyone that has any sort of wounding capabilities, which do entire rows or entire side of the board or something like that, it's just going to completely decimate this deck entirely, you know, unless they don't know to remove your Neckers and Arrakis quickly. But it also feels like they could probably do it at any time, and it'll still work. If you manage to duplicate it and you get 6 Neckers or Arrakis, they could still lacerate then, and it'll still be, okay, what can I do now? You know, I haven't got any more Neckers or Arrakis left, and I've still got some monster nests. So, you know, it just feels like it's going to be a deck which you can't really protect yourself against the things which are going to come, which are wounding in some way. Scorch is not a big deal because, you know, there's only 1, and you've got loads of stuff which is higher than those guys. So, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know what you think about the deck. I will be doing some more decks, and I can't wait to do them. I think this is the first one I did. It's not necessarily going to be anywhere near the best deck, so I can't wait to try out some more and see if I can get one which I feel, yeah, this is going to be the one that I'm going to start with when the game releases. Thanks for watching, everyone. Take care of yourselves.